Why hello there and welcome to another Wuthering Waves discussion video. I have a cozy video for you today. We're going to be talking about the main story. I'm going to be talking about chapter 1 and my experiences with it. So I hope that this video finds you well, and with no further ado, let's get right into it. As you may or may not be aware, I stream Wuthering Waves here on YouTube, and I tend to do like the main story content and the big important stuff on stream so that, my audience can experience it with me. I recently finished chapter 1, so I figured it would be a fun time to go ahead and talk about my thoughts and my experiences with the story here in Wuthering Waves, and we can do it one chapter at a time because it seems like if we don't get an entire chapter all at once, I'm sure it'll be like we get the first 2 acts and then we get 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. But yeah, I figured this would be a good conversation to have. I find story to be a really important element of game design for me. I know for some gamers it's extremely secondary. They care way more about the gameplay than they do the story of the game, but for me, I feel like I sort of hold them in equal weight. Of course, I think gameplay is important, and if a game is not fun to play, then fundamentally it's not really a good game. But I also find that story is an important element for me in terms of immersion and just caring about what I'm doing. If I'm playing a video game and the gameplay is really fun, but the story is absolutely poo-poo, it's just garbage or whatever, then I usually have a really low level of like emotional investment or like, just investment in general in like what's going on in the video game. So outside of the fun that I'm having, I don't really care. And the second that the game stops being immediately like dopamine fueling and stuff like that, is really easy to lose interest and move on. So to me, like, story is what gives games staying power. When I look back and I think of games that I've played in the past, the ones that stick out to me are of course the ones that are fun, but more importantly, the ones that were fun and had a really great story. All right, so to get things started, I figured we would break this out into like 3 little chunks here. Like you have the intro, you have the middle with Scar, and then you have the ending with the Threnodian. So to start out, let's talk about the very beginning of the game, like the exposition. Of course, you wake up out of nowhere and suddenly you're in a new world, and guess what? You'll never believe it, but you don't really remember anything. So yeah, the game starts out with the amnesia trope, the most overdone trope of all time, but it's extremely convenient and allows you to bring your reader along, like allows them to put themselves in the shoe of the main character, or shoes. You don't just wear one shoe, I hope. And while I wish that they had like a more creative way to like introduce us to the world and allow us to like learn everything alongside the main character, at least there are some mentions of it in the gameplay so far. Like in the story, like there's mentions that we may be some ancient hero that gets put to sleep and reawoken at times of crisis. There's potentially like a lore thing where it's like our memory gets wiped every time we get put back down to like sleep between conflicts or something like that. I'm not really sure, but there may be something a little deeper to it, more so than just like, oh, we hit our head really hard. Moving on from that, pretty much as soon as your character wakes up, you are, interacting with some characters, and they lead you to the first major city of the game. There's a lot of exposition leading up to this point. Like there's a lot of terms and stuff thrown out. There's a lot of tutorials and stuff like that. So this is a very like information heavy part of the game where they're giving you a lot of knowledge all at the same time. I understand the need to do that, but it does feel like this beginning section is quite heavy on the information, and I often felt like I wasn't really sure if I was catching what was going down. And now, on one hand, I kind of like not having things explained to me like I'm a baby. There are just quite a few things that are mentioned in the very beginning of the game where it sort of just went over my head. It's like, wait, I don't really know what they're talking about here. I think I can guess, but like I'm not really sure. But that's just a small complaint. It's a fantasy sci-fi game. There's going to be a ton of new terms to learn. That's just sort of like the nature of these kinds of games. So moving on from there, you are directed that you're going to like meet the leader of the city or whatever, because apparently you're very important or something like that. And that's sort of where the game starts out. Now, the meeting is supposed to be when you first show up at the city, but then you find out that you have to wait 3 days. And while you're waiting those 3 days, you're given like some things to do. Essentially, you're given some items and you need to like decipher their meaning so that when you have the meeting with the leader, you can get their message, I guess. And honestly, it feels very much like you're just being tested by the leader or something. Now, they do say that you have the choice to completely ignore the puzzle things. I don't know if that's true or not. I chose to like pursue all the ends. I like to see everything. I like to read everything. I like to experience the whole story. I don't really like skipping through a bunch of stuff. I mean, if the story is literal absolute garbage, then yeah, I guess I will skip skip it. For the most part, I tend to like to enjoy and read the stories of the games that I play. So I went ahead and I focused on completing, they're called tokens. Like I went ahead and focused on completing those and figuring out what they meant. And that in turn allowed me to learn even more about the world. It gave me much more lore. It helped me like unpack certain things that I didn't really understand at first. And yeah, that was overall a really good experience. I am actually really curious if you can just skip it, if you can just be like, nah, I don't feel like doing that. It kind of comes off as if you have the option to do so, but I'm not really sure if that's the case or not. If you did skip it, or if that was something you chose to do, you should let me know in the comments if that's what happens. And if so, you should let me know what was the result of that. I'm kind of curious. So anyway, after you finish doing that sort of side stuff with the tokens, which also leads you along a bunch of other stuff that you end up doing, as well as solving the tokens. And during this section, it's really neat. I like it a lot. Honestly, it felt like sort of a more unconventional sort of quest thing. You know, instead of someone saying, here's a thing that we're gonna do, we're gonna go do the thing, they sort of handed you a bunch of stuff and said like, we don't really know what to make of any of this, but we'll figure it out. And that left like a lot of intrigue. So I liked that sense of intrigue at the start of the game. So doing the tokens leads you along a path, and you essentially end up interacting with Scar, and you end up doing this whole sequence where you find like a village that has been destroyed and stuff like that. And it's a pretty interesting sequence, I'm not gonna lie. I've heard some people complain about it online. Apparently, like some people don't really like it, but this is where I first want to mention there's a lot of cutscenes in this game. I was actually impressed to see that there's quite a bit of cutscenes. They're more frequent than something like Genshin for sure. I think this helps glue things together, but also it kind of keeps things fresh. You don't spend an incredibly long time just going from person to person, talking, reading dialogue. There are these little breakup points of like cutscenes and stuff that sort of like shakes things up a little bit. But yeah, you meet with Scar and there are a lot of cutscenes, and he sort of introduces you to what I guess we can assume are the enemies of this game, the enemy faction of this game, the big bads or whatever. And I actually thought that this part was pretty good because despite all the other people in the game telling you that these people are like pure evil, I feel like Scar does a really good job of sort of illustrating that like he may just be like a victim of a cruel world kind of thing, and maybe that just sort of drove him crazy or whatever. Like it definitely comes off as more complicated than just bad guys bad, good people good. But obviously they are still pretty bad. The Fractidus seems to do like, that's what the faction is called. I don't even know if I said that right, but they seem to be kind of like up to no good. They seem to be like accelerationists where they're like, whatever, let's just destroy the world together. I'm hoping to see that like maybe there's a little more depth to the faction over time, because it does kind of seem like they're a little bit anarchist. They're sort of just like, ha, let's just end the world. We don't care. Everything sucks, so let's make it worse kind of thing. And that's cool and all, but I do hope maybe the leader has more going on and it's a little deeper than like what Scar is interpreting it as being, you know what I mean? But either way, I did really enjoy the sequence. For a long time, it felt very non-confrontational. It felt like he was genuinely just trying to have a conversation with Rover. And then you end up getting into the fight sequence, and the fight with Scar was actually really cool. Now, obviously, it was a little reminiscent of like the child fight, like the Tartag fight from Genshin, where it's like first phase, the normal person, and then they have like their transformation for the second phase. But like the fight itself was different, you know what I mean? And that was cool. I really like Scar's transformation. It looks really cool. It's just a really neat design, I'm not gonna lie. And I really like the boss fight. Like in general, I feel like Scar's animations were really well done. All the boss fights have been really well done up to this point, but I just really enjoyed Scar's fight. Like in particular, I really like when he does the grab attack and he like slams you on the ground and then he throws you away and he just laughs at you. He just literally laughs at you. I think that is so good. That is so much like character built into the fight. Like that's great. So essentially we beat up Scar, and then we have our like long awaited meeting with the magistrate, sort of like talking about like what we learned from Scar, from the tokens, from all that other stuff. And this starts moving us into like the end stage of the chapter 1, where the magistrate sort of clues us into like more of an overarching problem that's going on. Like the Sentinel, which is sort of like the guardian of the city or the region, I guess, has fled, and there's sort of like a prophecy where apparently this Sentinel can tell the future or something like that, and they prophesize that you're gonna have to fight them, and that, you know, something bad, whatever, I don't know, something is gonna happen. So again, this brings back the intrigue. This brings back sort of like the mystery of like, we don't really know what's gonna happen in the future, and I feel like that should be an important element of like this game, and I hope that they keep that up with the story writing, that like there should always be that element of intrigue. We kind of know where things are going, but we don't actually know exactly where things are going. There's almost always sort of like a layer underneath that we're maybe somewhat privy to, but like not completely aware of. Now I have to admit, like this is where I have to really start like talking about some mixed feelings with the story, because Act 5 I was really not that huge on. Act 5 had like a lot of lead up, and it essentially just felt like sort of filler content a little bit. Like it didn't really feel like anything super important was happening. There was this like one dungeon sequence where like you go in and you're supposed to like solve this big puzzle, and Rover knows how to solve it and just like inner monologues the whole time how to solve it. And the writing for the inner monologue was like super robotic and weird. The Rover was like, I will now have to move over in this direction to activate the mechanism that will allow me to move on to the next step of this puzzle. I was expecting a Zelda dungeon sort of feel, you know, it's like, oh, a puzzle and like a big room and I have to figure it out. It was not that. And I know that it's the beginning of the game, so maybe they're being a little hand-holdy there, but like, let us fail. Let us get confused by a puzzle. That is one of my biggest complaints, is when puzzles are like brain dead easy, because then it's not a puzzle. It's just going from point A to point B. But then after Act 5 being incredibly boring and kind of just like, I don't really care, Act 6 was super good. Once we got into the actual sequence with like the Threnodian and like the lead up to that and everything, that was super epic. I like how they use the environment in the storytelling. Like it's not just in a cutscene or something. Like the big statue is there. And like I actually noticed this with an exploration quest. I haven't done a lot of the side quests yet because I've sort of focused on the main story, but I did do the Inferno Rider quest. The Inferno Rider quest was pretty cool because it actually changes elements of the environment, and it's, you know, it's a long quest, but the lead up feels very epic because the ending is super epic. And, you know, I feel like they did a really good job of that with chapter 1. There's a lot of lead up, but then you get to the end and it is actually so epic. And I'm not gonna lie, I gotta give a special shout out to the sequence with Xian, where you're like talking about a retroact rain and you're going into all that stuff. I didn't really understand retroact rain before this whole sequence, and I feel like the way that they explained it in that sequence was really cool. And also, like, that was probably my favorite sequence of the whole chapter. I'm not gonna lie. Learning about his backstory, learning about the fight that was over, I can't remember what it was called, like the something of the crescent moon or something like that. The battle where all the phantoms revived and people were like fighting their dead friends or whatever, as well as fighting like revived Tacit Discord. Like it just was a really cool sequence. I really liked it. Very epic. And I hope that they do more stuff like that. But yeah, the fight with the Threnodian, super epic. That whole sequence leading up and the fight itself were all so cool. I was pretty ready to be done with chapter 1 by the time I finished it. Like it felt like it was a full story. It felt like there was a lot going on. It felt like there was stuff to process, and it felt really, really, really epic at the end. The Threnodian of War, that's a pretty tough boss fight actually. Some of the attacks that boss uses are pretty intense. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought I had a great time. I don't know if this is the end of chapter 1. Like this is the end of the available content that we have right now, and I kind of think it's the end of chapter 1, but I'm not really sure. And also, like, I don't really know if we're doing like one chapter per region or if it's gonna be like multiple chapters per region, or I don't really know how they're gonna structure the story. So I'm gonna call this a review of chapter 1, but if for some reason I'm wrong and there's like more to it, then I'll like change this title to say like part 1, and I'll do like a part 2 where I'm like, hey, there's more acts to go before we finish chapter 1. But I kind of think that this was like, this wrapped up chapter 1 really well, and I'm assuming that this is the end of chapter 1. Getting access to Havoc Rover is really cool. I really like the difference between the two builds. It feels like MC is not like, okay, in Genshin, the main character is definitely supposed to be like a weaker version of characters you can pull, in a way where it's like you're supposed to use the powers and be like, well, that's kind of nice, but I think I should probably just pull the 5-star instead. Rover actually feels like a really strong character, and like Havoc Rover is really fun to play. I could actually see myself building a team around that character. And also, one other thing I just wanted to say is that I really like that this story overall has more mature themes. It's darker. They're way less afraid to show death or talk about death or anything like that. Like, it just feels like overall the writing is more mature. Now, I will say you can tell which sections they focused on more and which sections kind of got like less love. I didn't really enjoy that aspect of it. It felt like some sections were sort of written as filler, like sort of like lead up stuff, but then the actual main story content, the stuff that's like supposed to be really important, you could tell they put extra love into it. And I'm not gonna lie, I just want them to put the extra love into all the story. I feel like they have the potential to write a really good story building on it and stuff like that. They just got to make sure to like not rest on their laurels, and they have to make sure to be careful about filler content, because I feel like in a game like this, filler content can drag really easily, especially like once we're like 7 chapters deep. If we have like a ton of filler content, that's just gonna bore people. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me today. I just wanted to talk about chapter 1, talk about my thoughts, my feelings, all that stuff. I may include some like b-roll while I'm talking of like certain sequences and stuff like that. I'm not sure. It may just be my face of me talking. I'm not sure. If you watched all the way through this video, make sure to hit the like button, make sure to subscribe, and if you want to leave a comment down below letting me know what you thought about chapter 1, what you think about the story so far, and maybe what you think about the story going forward. Do you think it's going to be good? Do you think it's going to be bad? Do you think it's going to suck? Do you think it's going to be amazing? Do you think it's going to be the best thing you've ever played in your entire life? Probably not that last one. Keep an eye out in the future for more videos. I have been working pretty hard to pump out consistent content, so hit that notification bell if you want to be notified of my future videos. I also am trying to stream once or twice a week, even though I just sort of like started a new position at a new job. I am still trying to make sure that I make time to stream and stuff like that. I just won't be able to stream like 3-4 times a week like I have been. Oh, and one last thing, I have a friendly little Discord. I'll have the link pinned in the comment section of the video. It's also in my link tree, which is in the description of my stuffs. But yeah, please join the Discord. We have a friendly little community. We got Wuthering Wave stuff, we got Genshin stuff, we got Star Rail stuff, got friendly people in there. We would love to see more people in there. But yeah, that's it from me, and I will be back soon with another video. So until then, do me a tiny itty bitty little favor and please drink some water.